Here's a little known fact. Here at Team TripleJump, we love nothing more than to kick back and relax with a good video game. I know, bonkers, right? What you also might not know though is that not every video game that's released is a good one. Oh, double shocker. All jokes aside, however, there are hundreds, if not thousands of video games that have released over the years, drawing the ire of both critics and players for one reason or another. The vast majority of these titles thoroughly deserve the harsh berating that they receive, but a small minority get unfairly judged by the population at large. Whether it's that they didn't live up to their pre-release hype, weren't quite as good as their predecessors, or had their releases marred by some sort of controversy, we think that these titles have had more than their fair share of criticism, and it's high time that came to an end. Video games have feelings too. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games that don't deserve the hate they get. Number 10. Fortnite. Let's face it, you don't become one of the biggest games in the world by being terrible, so why on earth do people hate Fortnite so much? Well, the long and short of it seems to be the toxic fan base that the game has garnered. Being marketed primarily towards children means the vast majority of players you come across will be young teens, and so even though not all Fortnite players are trolls, the level of maturity among the base is questionable, and has been cited by many as being the reason that they no longer play the game. It of course has other problems, with the lack of skill consideration in its matchmaking being another gripe, but aside from one or two minor niggles, overall, Fortnite is an incredibly competent entry into the Battle Royale genre. The player base is huge, so you'll never be stuck waiting too long for a match, and once you're dropped into the game, it's really quite fun scavenging for weapons and items in order to become the last man or woman standing. Just make sure to amp up your privacy settings first, so no 12-year-olds slide into your DMs to call you a noob. I'm such a granddad, there's no way kids are still saying noob. Number 9. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. There are several problems with releasing a subpar title. Obviously, there's the immediate disappointment you create in your fanbase, but there's also the lasting effects. So as a developer, you're going to have to work hard to regain their trust. After having phoned it in for a few releases, the Assassin's Creed series all but assured its own demise with Assassin's Creed Unity back in 2014. The game was a buggy mess, the most notable of the glitches being that horrifying missing face palaver, and many players wrote off the franchise as just yet another that was churning out pedestrian yearly releases to make a quick buck. This, regrettably, had a detrimental impact on the following year's release, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which sold poorly due to people's assumption that it was just more of the same. This is the thing though, it wasn't. Well, not really. Ubisoft took on board a lot of the feedback players gave about Unity, and for Syndicate they overhauled the combat system, allowed players to choose a male or female protagonist, and most importantly, ensured it was released without bugs. Granted, it was still an Assassin's Creed game, so it shared a lot with its predecessors, but compared to Unity, it was night and day. Sadly, hardly anyone noticed that because they were all too busy running cold water on the burns they'd got from the previous game. Number 8. Outlast 2. You know what we just said about how releasing a rubbish game will have a detrimental impact on everything that comes afterwards? Well, there's a similar issue with making something good, as there will always be those who judge it unfavourably against its older sibling. In other words, you can't win. Such was the case for Outlast 2, the follow-up to the pant-wettingly scary Outlast. The original is set in a dilapidated asylum, and it's up to the player to uncover exactly what the heck has gone on, all the while being hunted down by various monsters with no way to defend yourself other than to run or hide. The sequel is quite similar, only the institution and its inmates are switched up for fundamentalist cults and the Arizona desert. The issue with Outlast 2 was twofold. Firstly, the consensus was that its story and gameplay weren't as good as the original, and secondly, it had the audacity to release not long after Resident Evil 7. With all of that said, however, Outlast 2 is still a scary game, and whilst the setting is different, the gore is turned up to 11, and it doesn't have Jack Baker punching you in the face, it's still an unsettling survival horror game that will give you nightmares for weeks on end. Number 7. Watch Dogs. The problem with pre-release hype is that developers very much paint themselves into a corner, and any part of the game that doesn't live up to what was previously promised is just asking to get lambasted. Just ask No Man's Sky. This was largely the issue with Ubisoft's 2014 sandbox, Watch Dogs, as the developer had demoed it to the public with incredibly high-quality graphics, only for it to not look anything like the previews when it actually hit consoles. The developer claimed there had been no downgrade between the demo and actual release, but unfortunately, audiences could not be fooled this easily. Not only this, but releasing shortly after the behemoth that is Grand Theft Auto 5 meant that players' expectations for sandbox games were unforgivingly high, and Watch Dogs was written off by many as just another bland GTA clone that brought no new ideas to the table. If you can look past the graphical downgrade, the pre-release hype, and recognise that it's okay to not be GTA 5, however, then you'll find that Watch Dogs is a wonderful, technically proficient take on the open-world crime genre that combines entertaining storytelling, slick combat and stealth mechanics, and engaging puzzles, all into one neat little package. Number 6. Until Dawn, Rush of Blood. It's fair to say that if any genre lends itself to virtual reality, it's horror, and whilst the medium is still very much in its infancy, Until Dawn Rush of Blood made some good initial steps into exploring what can be done with VR when it comes to bringing the spookums. The main criticisms levelled at Rush of Blood, though, were its length, coming in at only around 2 hours, and the repetitive nature of the gameplay. Neither of these complaints is unfounded, as the game is indeed short and consists of the player character sitting on a roller coaster and just shooting at enemies, which is fairly repetitive, but neither one of those things stops it from being a good game. On the contrary, in fact, it's actually one of the better games that came out for the PSVR. What it lacks in size and diversity, Until Dawn Rush of Blood more than makes up for with its spooky atmosphere. Not only will it give players a handful of little frights, but it will also have them addicted, going back time and time again to improve their score or try their hand at a harder difficulty. The key is to just, and hear me out here, not take the whole thing too seriously. Can you manage that? Okay. Number 5. Batman Arkham Origins. We do have to feel a bit sorry for Batman Arkham Origins on account of the fact that most people had written it off before it was even released. We get it, Rocksteady did a fantastic job of Asylum and City, and without them, the series was going to go down the toilet, right? Well, no, actually, because although WB Games didn't do too much in terms of growing the series from a gameplay point of view, with many reviewers finding that the previous game's well-received elements hadn't really been built upon, what Arkham Origins did nail was the exploration of Batman's relationship with his adversaries. It even surprised a lot of critics with the lengths it went to in examining the Joker and his bond with Batman, something that the previous games in the series have failed to do so much as touch upon. It had always been a case of, oh look, here's the Joker again, without giving much thought as to why he does what he does. Whilst it would be unfair to claim that Arkham Origins is just as good as Arkham Asylum, considering that the latter is one of the finest superhero games of all time, it's even more unfair to write it off simply because of a change in studio when said change actually breathed a little life into what could have just been a clone of its predecessors. Yes, it's the worst game in the series, but it's really not a bad one. Number 4. Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. There's nothing wrong with games being short. In fact, there are a whole host of indie titles that will take up less of your day than the average Hollywood blockbuster. The issue is, if you're a series that's been well known for churning out games that generally take north of 15 hours to complete, you're gonna get some funny looks from your audience when you announce a title that comes in at just a fraction of that. This was the reaction that many MGS fans had when Ground Zeroes was released, with many assuming that the title was nothing more than a lazy attempt to just get money out of them. They couldn't have been more wrong though, because what Hideo Kojima was intending to do with Ground Zeroes was to showcase the direction in which he wished to take the series, and allowing them to sample what they could expect from the Phantom Pain. Although the game takes the vast majority of players less than 2 hours to complete, it shifts the tone of the series dramatically, and sets the stage for the events of the Phantom Pain. It was always intended to be nothing more than a prologue, and as long as players understand that, there's really no reason not to love it. Number 3. Mass Effect 3. If you make a point of telling players that their choices throughout a trilogy of games will ultimately affect the overall outcome, then oh boy, you had better deliver on that promise. Sadly for Mass Effect 3, developers BioWare utterly fluffed the ending of the epic space trilogy, at least in the eyes of the players, and now that's pretty much all the game is remembered for. Although it wasn't what fans of the series had expected, however, it is worth taking a step back and questioning whether or not BioWare did get it so wrong. Fair enough, the choices made throughout the series didn't have much of a bearing on the overall result, which is of course disappointing, but on reflection, the ending we did get closed off the story quite nicely. Not only this, but everything else about the game garnered more or less universal acclaim, including the rest of the game's story, its gameplay, and the wonderful performances from the voice cast. In short, if players had been able to forget about all of the pre-release hype and concentrated on all of the things Mass Effect 3 does have on offer, not including its ending, then it might be remembered slightly more fondly than it is today. Number 2. Star Wars Battlefront 2. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a game whose reputation precedes it. Anyone with even the vaguest interest in the video games industry will know about the scandal it generated upon its release. For those not in the know, EA got into hot water with everyone from players to politicians by including loot boxes in Battlefront 2, which contained items that could be used to get ahead in the game. In other words, pay to win. It also didn't help that many fan-favourite heroes were locked behind hours and hours of progression. People were outraged, and rightly so, and ultimately EA backed down to a certain extent. The damage was done, however, and now whenever anyone mentions the title, all they can think of is the controversy it was embroiled in. Now, whilst we all agree that the whole debacle shouldn't be forgotten lest history repeat itself, it is a little sad that this is all Battlefront 2 is remembered for, on account of the fact that it's actually pretty good. When you look past it, Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a decent shooter with a good amount of content, and whilst its story and gameplay are nothing groundbreaking, fans of the franchise can still have a lot of very beautiful fun running around the Frostbite engine with their mates and blasting stormtroopers in their stupid stormtrooper faces. And number 1, Resident Evil 6. It's not often that things come down to physical violence here at TripleJump Towers. However, there are a number of threats of grievous bodily harm being tossed around when our writer suggested the inclusion of Resi 6 on this list. I understand, Philip, it's not as good as the first one, now stop throwing things. Admittedly, Resident Evil 6 lacks some of the elements that made its predecessors so great. It's a massive departure from the survival horror genre, is severely lacking in the puzzle department, and not a single boulder gets punched. With that said, however, Resi 6 is not a bad game if you look at it on its own merits. Though not all of the campaigns are winners, the Leon S. Kennedy Fun Time Bonanza is a great deal of zombie-kicking fun. And whilst you won't find anything akin to Suitcase Tetris, the scarcity of resources is enough to take you right back to those heady 90s days of desperately trying to conserve ammo. Put simply, if you can look past the infuriating mediocrity that Chris Redfield brings to the party and just enjoy Resi 6 for what it is, i.e. a slightly campy zombie action romp, then you know what? You might just enjoy yourself. God damn it.